How you guys doing today? It's Anthony Gangi. Welcome to another episode of Tier Talk. Guys, we're going to answer a question that's coming from one of our viewers. Basically, the question is they're getting ready to move up, and they're concerned that they're going to have to make decisions that may conflict with who they're looking to be in this profession, who they want to be. And sometimes, guys, as management, you know that we have to make difficult decisions. And I guess the concern is going to be is, do those difficult decisions pull us further and further away from who we're trying to be, basically that impact that we're trying to have on that profession. It's actually a very deep discussion, but definitely a discussion that I feel is worth having. And of course, who's going to be my guest, but Connie Alleyne. Connie, how are you?
Hi, Connie Alleyne here from the Civilian Corrections Academy. Super excited to be here. Looking forward to answering the questions. And of course, you guys, I want you to check out the Fly Behind the Walls, a podcast on all of your listening platforms. And I've now added Conversations with Connie. Check it out at www.conniealleyne.com.
By the way, guys, if you get a chance, the podcasts are phenomenal. Very informative, a lot of information. And again, just another perspective on this great field of corrections. Now, guys, if you haven't, the show Tier Talk to you, brave men and women that work in corrections. So please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. We're going to go to our sponsor. And we come back, we're going to be talking about professional growth mixed in with personal growth, but ultimately some of the conflicts it presents as you move into correctional management. Stand by.
I wanted to attend a university that had an intelligence program. I wanted to look at problems different. I wanted to increase my critical thinking abilities. AMU offered those avenues to expand. Obtaining your degree as an adult, you're actually paying yourself and investing in yourself. You can't put a dollar on it, it's priceless. It's something that can never be taken away from you.
American Military University. Learn from the leader.
Guys, inmate manipulation is a course that is highly needed. It's the process that's so slow moving and subtle that you don't realize it's happening. When inmates choose to manipulate, they manipulate our need to react. Situational awareness and insight is going to save your career. It's going to save you from doing foolish things. Listen to your gut. So the more insight we have, the more we can recognize what isn't so overt, and we can correct our behavior before we fall into a trap that we can't get out of. If you allow an inmate to pull you out of your prescribed role, you are opening up a door for a host of problems. Inmate manipulation, the psychology behind inmate manipulation. Available now. Link in description. All right, and we're back. Hey, Connie, obviously you find that this topic is very interesting because this is the second time we are having this discussion. We had some technical difficulties because Connie likes to do this beautiful, beautiful scenery in the back that invites nature into the show. Nature wants to watch what's happening on Tier Talk, and nature has a voice, and nature kept on interfering with my voice. So thank you, Connie, for being willing to come back on and have this discussion. All jokes aside, I think it's great to re-explore a topic, and thank you for taking the time out to help me deal with the technical difficulties. So thank you.
You are very, very welcome. And I'm sorry about the birds chirping. They decided they wanted to join us today. It's Sunday. Come on.
Hey, can I tell you something, though, to be honest with you? I'm glad we get to revisit it again because I think there's actually some points that we could revisit and maybe kind of explore a little bit more, because when we were doing it the last time, we kind of brought into the topic knowing your roots. I think maybe we should start with that. You know, I think this person's concern is that when they become a supervisor, they're really concerned about holding on to their roots, but I think they're concerned about the perception of them holding on to their roots. And let me explain that before I forward over to Connie. Is I think that we know who we must be, and I think that when you become management, you take your roots with you. You have to. I mean, you're not going in with no knowledge. You're going in with a sense of the profession and also what you bring to that profession. That kind of travels up with you. But with that said, when we have to make decisions that unfortunately may conflict with what the front line wants or your subordinate staff wants, they're going to have that perception of you forgetting your roots. So I think the concern here is that we have to remember at all times who we are and who we need to be. And that's where the consistency is. The consistency doesn't come from how others see you per se. The consistency comes with how you are consistent with yourself, and then eventually that consistency will manifest its way out. But Connie, what's your thoughts on knowing your roots?
So I think one is, sometimes we make the error in assuming that when someone shifts gears in their career that somehow they forget where they started or they forget where they come from. And that's simply not the case. That's actually the one thing that probably gives you what you need in order to successfully build moving forward. You remember what it was like on the front line. You remember what it was like, how hard it was. It makes you very sensitive to what's going on. And when those higher level decisions come to be made, it's you having the context of what it was like being on the front line that helps you bring a different perspective to that discussion. So I think, holding on to your roots is important, but it also should not be something that prevents you from growing and sort of helping others to grow, because I was where you were. I understand what you're going through. And when you make those decisions, you have the context of this is what the people are really experiencing. You're not so far removed from where you started, and you're not making these decisions in a vacuum. So hopefully, these conversations help people to understand that just because you may have elevated in your career, it certainly does not mean that you forgot where you came from.
Right. And I want to touch on becoming a supervisor. Now, some people will say that you need a lot of time in to become a supervisor. It's really not about time, but the quality of time. You could have slower facilities that will never prepare you because they don't challenge you enough. And you could be in that facility for 10 to 15 years and still not have that challenge that's going to make you a good leader. And guys, by the way, supervisor and leader are not interchangeable. Supervisor is one thing, leader is the other. But then you could have facilities that test you the moment you get in. You're forced to make decisions pretty much every second of the day. And within a few years, maybe there's enough quality of experience there that will make you a good supervisor. But with that said, especially when you're going from the front line to that first supervisory position, that frontline supervisory position, that's a very big leap, because that's the first time that you're actually going to be supervising your former peers. I mean, yeah, we all have some level of supervision over inmates, but this is going to be a different level of expertise that's required. You're going to have to step into that supervisory role and then be responsible for the work of others. Now, a lot of people will sit there and say, well, I want to become a supervisor because I want that money. The money wears thin after a while. Trust and believe, guys, that responsibility for other people's work, if you're not ready for that, you are not ready to take on that supervisory position. Would you agree with that, Connie?
Absolutely. I mean, the monetary compensation, yeah, that's great. But at the end of the day, the sheer gravity, I think, of the decisions that you have to make, the responsibilities that you would carry, the accountability that you carry when you step into those managerial roles is so significant that that compensation really does outweigh, the responsibilities that lie ahead.
Right. Now, when we talk about responsibilities, we talk about adapting to the new role. It's not that you change, but you grow. And I don't want people to mix the two, because just like I said, leadership and supervisor is not interchangeable. Neither is change and growth. And I don't know if some people are going to argue that, but I believe change to some extent is maybe a 180, where growth means that, yes, there is a level of change, don't get me wrong, but there's still some parts of you that stay true to who you are that brings that level of comfortability to that next level. So when some people say you have to change to become management, I agree to some extent, but not 100%. I agree that's more of a personal growth, which requires you to take what you have and then try to apply it at another higher level. So, Connie, let me ask you a question, because I want to see if we're on the same page. Do you see a difference between change and growth, where change is a part of growth but cannot be interchangeable, where growth is not equal to change?
For sure. So like when I think change, I think you think of changing your clothes, right? You take off one shirt, you put on something completely different. So when I think when there's change, there is a complete, change of how you conducted yourself, a change of what you might be thinking. But I think with growth, there comes integration. With growth is I've learned new things. It doesn't mean I'm going to change who I am. It just means that I am going to integrate my new learning into who I am today. As I go from being a manager to being a leader, right? Like different skills are required. So as I acquire new skills, I am certainly growing in my perspective and growing as a person, not necessarily just changing, which means there's been some shift in sort of that thought process or your directive or perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I actually like what you're saying too, because change and growth, growth is integrating what's needed, where change is kind of just that 180. And I don't know if I made that clear when I was bringing that in, but basically change is not equal to growth. Growth is a development process, and it's definitely going to be something that is going to be a part of you when you not only just enter this profession, but when you decide to move up. When you decide to move up, there is a bit of growth. And also I want people to realize that growth does not involve you letting go. It just involves you kind of growing into that new role and making sure that, what you've learned can be applied, even if it's failure. Failure can still go into success as long as it's constructive and you don't kind of keep your head down with the failure, hold your head up and you keep yourself motivated to move forward. Now, for the person that asked this question, I think their biggest concern is really about perception. It really is. It's like, I'm going to take this leadership role, and then what's going to happen is I'm going to be supervising people that I already know or knew, and they're not going to see me as a supervisor. So one thing right off the bat is, first off, you have to see yourself first as a supervisor, and then eventually others will fall in line. But here's a little trick of the trade here. I do believe that when you become a supervisor, you should be transferred to another facility, just at first, only because you want to adjust into that supervisory role. And you really want to be in an environment where, for the most part, the people there only see you as a supervisor, because it is hard. It's a very hard adjustment to become that supervisor and then be put right into a position where you have to supervise your peers. So if there's a chance that you could transfer out and go to another facility, I know that may not be possible for everybody. I mean, jails, you may have to stay where you're at. But if there's a chance for you to take that chance and take that leap and go to another facility and hone those skills as a supervisor, that's great, because you're going to put that control. It's on you. It's not so much dependent on the environment, and then eventually when people start coming in that you may have worked with before, because transfers do happen, they're the ones that have to make the adjustment, not you, because your environment now and how other people see you are going to see you as a supervisor. Now, for those that may have to supervise in the same facility that they're at, it's hard, because your environment is not going to see you as a supervisor right away. So a lot of the skill that you need to develop as a supervisor there can't be dependent on the environment. It can't be, because your peers are going to probably push you away from wanting you to be that supervisor and kind of relate to you again as you were one of their frontline peers, one of your frontline associates, and it can't be. What you have to do is you have to allow yourself for personal growth, which means that for the latter, for the facility that you were an officer at or you were a frontline employee at, and now you have to move up, as I said, you can't depend on the environment. You're going to have to look at yourself, and you're going to have to create that environment. Would you agree with that, Connie?
Absolutely. I mean, as you transition during your career, like, the reality is that there is a level of professional maturity that you're going to have. There will be situations that you face that you're not familiar with. And, you want to make sure that when you face those different situations that you either start to build the skills that you need and really not personalize everything, because not necessarily everything is a personal attack on you. And I think that's something that we got to kind of take into account you know, having transitioned from line worker to a manager and had to supervise folks who were once my peers was challenging, you know, but I feel like it is those challenges that you have to use as opportunities for growth yourself, because they are difficult situations. You will have to have difficult conversations with folks who are your friends, right? And so it's also being able to kind of delineate or just set that professional boundary with those folks who are your friends if you don't have the opportunity to become a supervisor in another facility.
Right, and to be honest with you, as soon as you become a supervisor, if there's a chance where right away, let's just say hypothetically, you do have to write up somebody who was once your peer or was once someone that you worked the front line with, that's going to be an immediate wake-up call for you. That's going to be a humongous test, because that's where you can kind of see the emotion and conflict behind that decision that you have to make, because one, that's your peer, you know, was your peer. I apologize. I keep on saying peer. Was your peer, but now you're in that leadership position, and now it requires you to go ahead, step up, and do what the agency expects of you. And it's not easy. It's a decision that you take home with you. It's a decision that, you know, plays with your head a little bit, but in the end, you have to take that responsibility, because that's part of why you became a supervisor. But the unique thing about this all, and actually it sucks to have to write up somebody that was your peer, but once you get through that, once you're able to motivate yourself past that and do what's expected of you, one thing is that the people that you used to work with that you now supervise will also start build that respect for you, because hopefully they may even understand why you're writing up that individual. Because that's another thing, guys. Part of who we are travels up with us. So the only person that may start to try to question your roots may be the person that's not understanding why they're being written up, but they also don't see you in the context of who you are. You know, basically who you were in the past, and then, you know, who you are now, because people don't realize that the decisions we make, don't take them out of context of who we are. Because if I was never an asshole and then I become a supervisor and I'm put in a position where I have to write you up, that's not 100% on me. That's actually 100% on you. If, again, you know who I was, and I'm just not that kind of person, you know, who goes to chase after people to want to write them up. You know, again, it's, you know who I am because we work together. But with that said, the other part about this immediate wake-up call also is for yourself. Because as much as you don't want to do it, whether it's an emotional thing or maybe you don't agree with it, I'm not going to say it gets easier, because decisions are hard every step of the way, but you become more confident in doing it. You become more confident in knowing that I can get this done, because the questions, the emotion is really about yourself being able to do that. Can I write up someone who I used to work next to? So it's hard. It's always going to be hard. But as you go through the motions, you become more confident and you stop questioning your ability to do that. Am I on the right page here, Connie?
For sure. I mean, my first wake-up call was actually having to do a performance evaluation for a peer, who was once a peer. You know, like, I think for me, the lesson learned was that, so as you shift into this new role, you have to know your stuff, right? And so part of being a supervisor is providing folks with feedback, being honest, being transparent, so that they're never blindsided. So even if you end up having to write somebody up, like, I would like to think that you've already had some sort of conversation or dialogue with this person, and that this interaction is not going to be a surprise, so that it cannot be misinterpreted as being a jerk. It cannot be misinterpreted as some outside entity has come in and give you a directive and you're just following suit without having their backs, because you want it to be certain. You want to be certain that whenever you come forward and you've got to actually sit with somebody, counsel them, write them up, whatever that is, that you're doing it on your own merit. You have made a decision that what somebody did was inappropriate or was not right or whatever the case may be, and you have to be able to own that. So as you transition, I think as you continue to learn in that role of being a supervisor, manager, whatever level you're transitioning to and from, that you have to be able to take ownership and like be okay with that. And I certainly agree that the more that you do that, the more confident you are. And the more, I don't want to say the more easy those conversations are, but the more at ease you feel with having those conversations.
Hey, Connie, you actually, when you were saying this, made me think of something else. You know, we talked about the environment working with us, which would be ideal if you can go to another facility. But if you can't, then that's where your former peers, the people that you now supervise, need to create that environment for you. And I'm serious about that. Like, if you're becoming a supervisor, right, and this is your next level, then the people that you used to supervise, again, like Connie was kind of leading into, is, you know, if there are concerns, they have to understand of why you need to address these concerns. And I'm actually seeing good supervisors, or I'm sorry, good leaders change when the environment pushes them to change. Because you got to realize something, the greater pressure is always going to come from above. And don't get me wrong, we do have an influence to some extent. You know, we could always speak up for our people, and that's a good leader. I'm not telling the leader not to do that. Anytime you have a chance to open that door and speak for your people, speak for your people. But if there's just no resolution, there's a chance that something has to be done, some action that the front line may not want. But again, you made a good effort to speak it up. The front line needs to know, without you saying it, where the issue really is. Because again, we talked about this on the prior one that we couldn't keep, unfortunately, where as a leader, if I have to make a decision that I'm not good with, I'm not going to point the blame at anybody else for the reasons of making that decision. It's mine. You gave me the directive. I have to make the decision. I tried to give you some arguments against it. It didn't work. But I'm not going to be a coward and say, hey, I have to do this because the management up here wants it. No. So a lot of that I'm going to internalize, and that's going to be conflict for me. It is. But I have to internalize it because I also want my bosses to have faith in me. You know, so there's the faith that you want from the front line, and then there's the faith that you want from those that supervise you. And at the end, the key is to get the message done or get the mission done as fair as possible. And sometimes one party's not going to see it as fair, and it's sad, but you're just the messenger. You know, you're the one that has to translate between management and frontline and management, and you have to find a way to speak both languages. But the key is that the environment has to give you that chance to grow. Now, if the environment doesn't give you that chance to grow, if the front line pushes pressure on you that really, you know, it forces you to get stuck and not know what to do, the problem here is that you are going to change as a supervisor. You know, you're not going to become that leader anymore. You're going to be a supervisor, sad to say. And it's because obviously there were pressures placed on you from the front line that you just couldn't help as much as you tried. Because here, sad thing is that in the world we live in, people don't appreciate the effort. They only appreciate the outcome. You know, and the thing is it's great if I'm able to stand up and say, hey guys, I don't want to do this, the reasons why. But now if I'm still outvoted and I have to go ahead and do what I got to do, know for a fact that you know me enough to have tried the effort, you know, to at least went forth and tried to do something. The supervisors that change, or the leaders that change, you know, I know they're not interchangeable, but bear with me. They change because they're forced into it, because they're getting pressures from all sides, and really nobody's actually looking at them, you know, being squished from both sides, and no one's asking them, hey, breathe for a second. What's going on? Are you okay? No, because middle management is so worried, or frontline management is so worried about the needs of the front line and management, that no one's asking the supervisor in the middle, I have needs too. I'm being forgotten because I can't solve this issue. So what winds up happening is this unforgiving pressure that comes from, eventually from both sides, changes that supervisor or leader to say, you know what? I can't go through this pressure again. I'm going to alleviate it by just getting rid of one pressure. Just one pressure. And it's going to be the pressure that probably is going to be the front line, sad to say. Because remember, we're talking about leaders that make the effort. We're talking about leaders that speak up, but in the end, they can't affect the change that they want because they too are their hands are tied. And sometimes frontline sees that person delivering the message as they're the one responsible for the message. But in the end, if I'm being forced to do something for management and I tried to negotiate, even though you don't appreciate the effort, but I tried, and then it comes to the front line's attacking me, I'm sorry, I still got a job to get done. I mean, I can go back and say I tried, but in the end, this decision has to be made. And in the end, I agree with that decision. You know, Connie, you have to admit, sometimes the pressure from the front line without understanding the pressure of that frontline manager can force that leader to, I guess, lack of a better term, become a supervisor.
I mean, unfortunately, that's just the nature of the beast, right? So I feel that part of that is you're going to have the haters, you're going to have the naysayers, you're going to have people who are simply not going to be supportive of you and will not necessarily give you the benefit of the doubt. I think that the people who really do know you, and as they get to know you as a person and begin to know who you are as a supervisor, as a manager, as a leader, they will be able to know that, you know what, even though this is a directive that's coming down, I know Connie don't support that because she knows better. You know, I know that this person really isn't all in on this because they know the impact this is going to have on us. They know the impact that this is going to have on care delivery or that this is going to have on the population. And I think the more that we allow people to really see who we are as individuals, the better that it becomes as far as how we start to engage with them and how they accept us in as the manager or the supervisor or the leader of that unit, whichever way it works out for you.
Yeah, and again, the motivation for that person to become that leader really comes from how he is perceived or she is perceived by both ends. But really, I think for a leader, yes, you want that respect from above. Don't get me wrong, as a frontline leader, but I really do think how the front line perceives you is very, very important. Because I think if you have a trust with your front line, then technically your leadership, you know, that's above you, they want you to have that trust, you know, because again, it makes it easier for them to, you know, get those harder decisions out there. Because you know what's funny is we mentioned it before, it is about the perception of the messenger. So if you take in context of who I am, you know, now who I am as a supervisor, but again, built from the roots of who I was as a frontline professional, you kind of have an idea of what type of supervisor I'm going to be. And hopefully I don't let the times change me. Unfortunately, I can't speak for everyone. You know, I mean, I've still held on to my roots, but there are some people that, you know, they change. But you know what's funny? We always have an inkling in the back of our mind that this person would have strayed. You know, it's weird. It's like an inner gut feeling. But sometimes it doesn't surprise us when we do have a person that we thought was cool at one end, but, you know, then when they get moved up, they totally don't even make the effort. Again, it's not the outcome, it's the effort. So with that said, and I know you're laughing, Connie. So, hey, before I go explore my thought, what are you laughing about? Help me out.
So I'm laughing because, you know, it's that age of what power does to people, right? And so there are some people who just can't handle the authority. And when they do, you actually see who they really are, right? And so in the seeing who they really are, sometimes it's seeing that this person really was an asshole. And this role or this authority inherited in this new title is giving this person sort of the playing field to truly be an asshole. And so I think when you also think of it that way of knowing yourself, if in fact you're a good person, no matter how much power you have, you're always going to be a good person. If you are an advocate, if you are someone who's out there really standing tall for your people, no matter what power you have, you will always stand tall for your people. It's kind of like, I think we had talked about it in another show, like that whole open door policy. I feel like there's some people who, like, once they get the power, it's like, no, you need an appointment, right? And there are those other people who are really down for their people. They want to know what's going on. They want to know how they could be of service, how they could be helpful still. And even if it's not in their wheelhouse and they have to pass it on to somebody else, at least those people are the people who you know will probably always have your back no matter what, no matter at what level they get to. And so when you started talking about the power, for me, I'm just thinking like, wow, you know, that's when you really see who's really down for you and who's not, because that power doesn't change who they are as an individual.
Right. And you know, speaking of that, we have the understanding of perspective. You said understanding a few times. And you know what's funny is when you're in middle management or frontline management, understanding the perspective of the front line and understanding the perspective of management is what helps you survive, because that's what's going to help you justify the decisions that you have to make. So again, if you're in a higher level position, please give those frontline supervisors a really good understanding of why something has to be done, because when they go ahead and have a conflict with a decision, that understanding will help them become more confident and stand by that decision when it has to be delivered to the front line. And when the front line has a problem with that decision, be open to that supervisor telling you why it has to be done, which means that you have to understand their perspective, you know, where the pressure is coming from. Because most of the time, if we don't get that understanding or supply an effort to understand, then we wind up having management that really becomes less confident in the decisions that are hard, the decisions that present some form of conflict. Now, I'm sure for you, Connie, when you were higher management, the best way that you could motivate your supervisors that are directly beneath you to deal with those decisions that have to be passed down is to make sure that they have an understanding of why those decisions are implemented, pass that understanding forward to the front line, and hopefully it still keeps good with the employee morale. Like, people are going to understand the decision and then be okay by it and then want to continue doing whatever that decision has to be made, whatever that decision is.
So for certain, I mean, for me, I can speak to, you know, there's a point in my career where we were having significant budgetary constraints. And one of the biggest things was we were going to scale back on staffing. And, you know, that is a tough, really tough message, no matter what level you are, no matter what's going on. And in this instance of having to scale back on the actual messaging, it was really trying to figure out, so here's the message to the nursing supervisors so that they actually understand what's going on. And then here's the message to like the line staff. So the nursing supervisors would pretty much come forward and say, hey, listen, this is what we're doing. And then you would have the line staff who, after they get the message from the nursing supervisor, would come back to me and say, Connie, is this really an expectation? Does central office really understand what the situation is? And I would have to say, central office understands the situation. Here is what we're doing right now in order to make sure that we meet our current mandates. And this is what we're going to do moving forward. So sometimes it's just giving the information and being transparent about that information so that people feel comfortable, even though they might not like it. At least they have the information and they can understand why a certain decision was made.
And what's great about what you're saying is understanding does lead to personal and professional growth. So it's great to, you know, if you want to transform people into leaders, or if you want to make them better leaders, give them an understanding, a good justification as to why things need to happen. Because again, you don't want people that are running on, you know, that are automatic. You want them to understand, because believe it or not, that understanding will also help them with other decisions that have to be made, because they start to get a better understanding of what's expected. You know, I'm reading a book right now by Robert Greene called Mastery. I love all of Robert Greene's books. I do. But this book, Mastery, really hit home for me, because he talked about sometimes that we limit ourselves in our professions, right? So sometimes we become apprentice. We want to learn everything, correct? And at one point, once we figure we learn everything, we become masters, right? But there's two types of masters. There's the masters that kind of, you know, yeah, I know policy, I'm great at it, and, you know, this means, you know, if A happens, B happens, and yes, they know it, they're masters, that's great, but they're still masters within this confined cage. Then you have what they call the creative masters, which don't just look at ABC, they look at DEF, GHI, JKL. And the best way to get those creative masters, or to become one yourself, so you don't just see within that limited parameter, is when you're given the justifications or the understanding of why something is done. That's the growth. It's not about what has to be done, but why it has to be done. That's what's going to help you grow in any profession, not just corrections. So that means you're going to go beyond the ABC, you're going to move through DEF, and you really wind up stepping into your own, becoming more comfortable with the problems that you have to deal with every day because you have a good trust in yourself. You're not limiting yourself. That's the key there too. You're not limiting yourself, and you're letting yourself grow. So the key, I guess, in the end of this dialogue that we're trying to have here is that you have to allow yourself to grow, but you have to also, if you're in the leadership position or if you're in that frontline position, the environment also has to provide you with opportunities to grow and reach your potential. What's your thoughts on that, Connie?
I was just about to say that there has to be a level of empowerment though, right? So managers have to be able to give their people some leeway to be able to be create. And I think Jinx puts us, and really not straying away too far from that in this traditional space. But when you do give your people the I guess sort of the runway to be a little creative, to kind of think out the box, to start looking at the EFGHIJ, then you start to, as the leader, you're actually cultivating something really great in your people. You're giving them the permission to step out of the box and to know that they're going to be supported as they step out of the box. Because I don't know that it's so much that people don't want to. I just think it's like, holy crap, if I do this, then I'm really going to get jammed up because this is the ABC. This is the confines I've been given to work in. But when we actually empower our people to really critically think and to really look, so it's okay you looked at ABC. How about DEF? How about GHI? And now they're like, oh, you mean to tell me I could look at that? Absolutely. Here are all the other things that I was thinking about. And it's like you open up, you allow their minds to expand, and then you shift that conversation. It becomes, here is not the problem anymore, because now I realize I have so many other options that I could work in. So I think, as much as I don't know how much empowerment we have going on in corrections. I think because we also have this chain of command, sometimes the empowerment may sometimes step over into a different chain that could sometimes create some muddy waters. But I think the more that we begin to empower people to look at other options, to critically think, and let them know that they'll be supported stepping outside the box, the better we'll be as an industry.
I like how you're saying empowerment, because I think that when you empower, that's where you start to see the blend of personal and professional growth. I think that if you want your people to run on automatic and only see ABC, well, eventually they're going to outgrow the profession, especially if you have people that want to be creative and, really want to make that impact, because it's the illusion of freedom that you're giving them. They're eventually going to find out that they're confined, they're in parameters, and they can't find their way out. So I really do agree with you that, to give them a chance to empower them, to give them a chance of understanding the decisions that have to be made, and let them take a journey into the DEF, GHIs, give them a chance to explore. They wind up maybe embracing the profession a little bit more, because they don't feel the limitations of what the other end would be, of not empowering your employee and only letting them see ABC. And guys, if you're in a leadership position, a supervisory position, ask yourself that. How free are you to be creative in the decisions that you make right now? I mean, are you able to go to DEF, or will your management jump right down on you? Or even vice versa. Frontline too could have a pressure on you, where you may want to explore another avenue of something, and they're just stuck to the old ways of things and just more comfortable when you feel that there's something you can implement. The key is that we wind up being our own enemies when it comes to destroying the potential for a creative employee, because creative employees, once you once they develop something, it could be something that makes it easier. But of course, there's that adjustment. And a lot of people don't want to adjust. They'd rather do things the old way than, not realizing that if they take the effort and learn, observe for a little bit, eventually it will be a lot easier. But there's hard work first. The hard work is understanding whatever that new method is going to be. It's like, my dad telling me all the time that, let's say he walked a mile to school this way. And I'll say, well, Dad, that's a great little story. But had you cut through a couple of backyards, actually the journey would only been half a mile. But they get so stuck in going that mile that they're not willing to climb some fences and do a little hard work to cut the journey in half. But eventually, let's just say my dad was willing, get a couple of scrapes and bruises, does the hard work. Eventually, he'll realize that, what? It's not that bad climbing these fences. I got the hang of it. And the key thing is, instead of it taking a half an hour, it only takes 15 minutes, which means I can get up 15 minutes later in the morning. I mean, it's just you have to struggle through something first. Because, again, nothing new is easy, but it could become easy once you give it the chance to do that. And I think we get stuck in those old ways. But, Connie, that empowerment thing was pretty good because I think it's empowerment that really blends personal and professional growth. And it's that empowerment that alleviates that feeling of being trapped. And if you have someone that does become a supervisor or a leader for the right reasons, you got to realize something. Most likely those reasons could be to have an impact. Now, I'm saying, and I said the right reasons, to have an impact in what they're trying to do, to be creative, whether it's going to reflect the front line, whether it's at a higher level, I don't know. But then what happens is if you don't allow them to be creative, if you don't allow them to have that impact, now you lose that leader, that potential for someone that could have been great because you didn't, what Connie said, you didn't empower them. You didn't empower them and give them the belief that they need to be creative because that's what they want. I mean, Connie, I'm going to tell Connie and me, we both have creative minds. Connie, I know for a fact, she wanted that leadership position, not for the power, but to be creative, to create something because she knew that she could. Same thing with me. I'm moving up to try to create something. Now, if you limit us and say all we can do is go within these parameters, A, B, C, we start to feel trapped in this profession, and we may not even realize we feel trapped. We may feel like, oh, we're doing what we got to do, but I keep on hitting these walls, and eventually you just get tired of hitting these walls. You have this illusion of freedom, but you're not free. And then what happens is, Connie, if you didn't have a chance to be creative, you didn't have a chance to see the subsequent letters of the alphabet after C, I will guarantee you would be like, you know what, I'm done with this.
I mean, nobody wants to feel that way, right? Nobody wants to feel trapped. And I think that as you work more in the field and you start to experience more, I think it's the natural progression of growth that as you grow, you want to do more. You start to see things a little different. You're like, oh, you know what? I had this experience. Maybe if we did this way, we could do something a little better, or we could do something bigger or something greater, or we could be more effective and more efficient. And I think that when you have those people who are kind of stuck in that fixed mindset, and, we can't do anything different. If we do it different, we're going to fail. Or even just those people who are those negative Nancys who can't see the possibility or the potential in something new just because it's something new. Our reality is that as we grow and evolve, we want to do things that we know will benefit the profession. I mean, I think about Civilian Corrections Academy, and I think about the people who said it's never going to be embraced by custody because it isn't custody. It isn't custody providing training to civilians. They think only they can train civilians. And I'm like, that's not true. I feel that here it is. I see all these wonderful things from this civilian perspective, and I still have the custody foundation to be able to provide that custody support or the custody perspective. And with that, it allowed for the creativity, allowed for like, wow, this is something new, it's something different. And it was something embraced because we acknowledge it was something that's not currently being offered. So I feel like we can't be trapped if we want to, in any way, shape, or form, innovate in this industry that we think is just, oh, it's so traditional, it's not growing, nothing's never going to change. It's not going to change if we don't do things to sort of facilitate that change. And just acknowledge the change will happen. It'll be gradual, but it will happen. It takes some people longer to buy in, right? That's why you got the early adopters, and then you got those who come in later on, right? That's just the nature of change, that it takes time, and you'll get people who will see over time that, okay, this is a great thing. Look at how it's evolving. Now look how much better things are since we've made X change, whatever that is.
Right. And I'll be honest with you, that's where also good leadership can, it's not just about creating the change, but explain why that change is needed to get people to buy in. And it really does start by how you are perceived, you know, how people see you. Because I'll tell you something, you know, it really is all about the message. If you don't like me and I say something, you're not going to listen. But if you like this person, they say the same exact thing, you'll listen. You know, it's a perception. It's true. It's the perception of how you see that person, and also the power of that initial impression. I can't tell you how important it is that when you step into that supervisor, that leadership role, that you step into it as best you can, because that initial impression is very hard to recover from if it's not good. If it's a good initial impression, you're great. You're good, set the authority, that's great, because that initial impression will pretty much define what comes out after that, believe it or not. That initial impression will later define any type of mishaps. But if your initial impression's weak, and then maybe later on you start to become stronger, you already set the foundation. So people see it differently, you know, because of how it's defined by that initial impression. So again, you have to embrace the role, but I'm also putting it on the environment as well to, I like, again, going back to what Connie said, empower you, embrace the role as well, because a lot of us aren't going to have that chance to have that environmental support. You know, when you go to a new facility, that's all they see you as. You're going to wind up having to work in the same facility, and that's where the environment will push on your growth. But if you have it from the opposite perspective, which we'll explore a little bit, you can affect the environment. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not saying that you can't work at the same facility and step into that supervisory role, because most, you know, we can. We can. But it's a harder transition. It's a harder transition. You know, it doesn't give you a lot of time to really focus on yourself, because what's going to happen here, it's going to be you focusing on the perception of how other people see you. If you're able to go to an environment where they don't know you and all they do is see you as a supervisor, then it gives you a chance to kind of see how you need to be seen, see yourself, and then have that manifest its way out and keep that consistency. Now, Connie touched on this in the other episode, and I think this will be the last part of our discussion, but she touched on consistency. Consistency is very important in leadership. Russ touched on the fact that you have to be consistent with yourself before you can be consistent with others. That plays out as a leader. So Connie, let's talk about how consistency can make us a better leader.
So I think that what happens with consistency is that the people that you manage or that you supervise become dependent. Like they know that this is who you are and this is who's going to come to the table at any given moment. And they have a comfort in that, right? So, you know, in our last video, I kind of just talked a little about, you know, having this really tense meeting with our warden, and my nursing supervisor is in there, lovely woman, very strong, very firm advocate for what she believes in, but can be abrasive at times. And so as much as I loved her and we had a great dialogue, you know, at a point, you know, Custody stopped hearing her, right? And so the same Connie that you see here is the same Connie that is presented in the same meeting. Yes, I'm annoyed. Yes, I have the same tensions. I'm frustrated. But I also know that the message can get lost in the delivery. And so as I'm in there, we're still having the good dialogue. We leave, we get back to the office, and she's like, Connie, like, are you freaking Gandhi? What the hell's going on here? How could you sit in that meeting and be so tame? And I'm like, you know what? Our reality is that professionalism is an expectation. And if we want to get our message across, we want to be invited to the table to have these conversations. You can't be in there trying to call somebody an asshole. Like, it just doesn't work that way. You can't be in there, I mean, and saying it nicely, right? Like, she wasn't being disrespectful about it, but like, essentially all the nice words were meaning the same thing. There's a way for us to do things. And I think that when people can count on you to be a sound voice, to have sound judgment, to come in and really be objective, like that is the reason why they end up inviting you to the table for these conversations, because you're going to be able to hear both sides out. You're going to be able to give good feedback, and reasonable feedback, no less. And that conversation does not end up being one that's stressful, which is what people tend to want to avoid. They don't necessarily want to go into every situation as a confrontation, right? And so that consistency that you bring to the table is what people begin to count on.
Yeah, well said, because that consistency also is good for yourself, because it becomes, you start trusting yourself. You become less anxious. You know, you're not afraid of the unknown because you may have an understanding of how you're going to react. If you're not consistent with yourself, then you're concerned about, I don't know how I'm going to react to the situations I face every day. So that consistency brings a good level of confidence and awareness of, you know, what you need to do with yourself. I want to go over a quick little story. I was able to go over it with the last episode we did, but unfortunately we lost it. But part of the dialogue was also trying to hold on to what's left of yourself as you move forward in this profession, because obviously we have to do our best even to hold on to the littlest bit of ourselves, because that is what the people ultimately connect with. You know, the nurses wearing their scrubs, the officers wearing their uniforms. It doesn't define us. What defines us are us wearing those things. Like, I'm not defined by the uniform. Connie wasn't defined by, you know, if she wore the shirt and tie because she was medical administration. But I'm sure her nursing staff is not defined by the scrubs. They're defined by who they are coming into this profession. So knowing who you are and holding on to that is very, very important, because you're going to bring that into each level that you travel up. Just a touch of it. Just a touch of it. And that's great, because we want uniqueness in our environment. You know, we don't want people being automatic robots. So you bring a little sense of that humanity with you, you know, that little sense of understanding and what I would call professional compassion. And I don't know if that was ever, I think I just created those two terms, but in corrections, it definitely plays out. I don't know where the hell that came from just now, but put that on a shirt, you know, professional compassion. That, Connie, you got a business, start making those shirts. I don't know where the heck that just came from just now. Even I took a step back like, hey, that's great. Connie, what does that mean to you? Let's explore that real quick.
I'm about to go get that printed at Amazon. I mean, professional compassion is just that. I mean, so we, especially I think in this industry, like, compassion is one of those soft words, right? Like, we don't tend to use those words in corrections. And so the fact that we can still, I think it's actually a great word when you think about it. I'm just thinking, you know, how many times have we had to, you know, discipline a staff person who was a great staff person? Maybe it was a staff person who you knew very well. You know, I think that's where the professional compassion comes in, that you still have to do your job as the manager, but you also still are a human being who may be feeling some level of compassion towards this person who found themselves in a crappy situation, or maybe themselves in a crappy situation, whatever it is. I mean, we still have feelings about these things when it happens, especially when it's people that we know.
Right. And the reason why those two words came to me is because it's what we're talking about, professional and personal growth. You know, so I think that kind of, you know, that professional compassion holds on to that little element of who you are that you're going to bring into every role that you, you know, find yourself in. So again, frontline, supervisory role, higher level executive management. Now, again, you're going to be facing challenges every day. You know, sometimes there are decisions that are going to pull you away from who you feel you need to be. Again, I wouldn't put that in a want or a need. I would just put that who you feel, because there's going to be conflict there. Like, you know, you have to carry out this professional decision, but you also know that you want to help them. And I think that's where it's more about a feeling, where the emotion is, you're working through your emotion to try to figure out how to deal with that situation. But inevitably you have to kind of put the emotion aside and do what is needed. And I think the more we push it aside, we start to think that we're losing out on that little sense of self that we've held on to so long for, you know, as long as we can. And I'll tell you something now, me having 18 years in, you don't realize, you know, the changes. They're slow and subtle. And again, I like to use the word growth because I really do believe that I've grown. Tear Talk has grown, you know, it's grown to the profession side of things. So everything grows. It doesn't mean, again, that you've done 180s. It doesn't mean that in order for me to grow, I have to let go of this. No, you grow, you develop. But sometimes you do look back and you try to understand the foundation of that growth, and you swear you hope it's from the same root. You know, we talked about roots of a tree last time, and in the last episode, unfortunately, we couldn't air it, technicalities, but you know, you got the root and then you branch out, but at the end, it's still that root. You know, you owe everything to that root. So sometimes when you tend to look back, you wonder, am I still true to that root? Or have I branched out so far that I've forgotten who I am? Now, mind you, I'm not talking about the root of the profession. I'm talking about the root of who you are coming in. I'm talking about you coming into this profession, understanding who you are, knowing who you are, and then being able, as you travel up, to look back and say, hey, am I who I want to be in this profession? So as mentioned, you're going to be tested. And you're going to be tested to see if you remember who you are. And sometimes you don't even realize you're being tested. That's the funny thing. Sometimes it's done on the subconscious level. But to give you a little story, you know, I have zero tolerance for people that decide to bring in contraband. You know, sometimes it's intentional, and sometimes you get people that are duped into it, or manipulated into it. But the consequence is still the same. That contraband could have presented a serious threat to the facility. But I think as a training officer, I think you're going to relate to the story a little bit, is that you invest in people. You know, we want the best for people. We give them great advice. You know, we try to train them in our likeness, what we want them to learn. But sometimes there are people that you train that just make bad choices. And as much as you want to hate them for bringing in that contraband and putting that facility at risk, there's also that investment of time that you put into that individual that you just can't separate yourself from. And therefore, you wind up seeing that individual a little bit differently. Yes, you're mad. Yes, you're upset. And yes, you know that they deserve the consequences that they're getting. But having said that, you've invested time in this individual. And part of you sees just the individual, just sees that young person that you were trying to nurture into your likeness or mentoring. And it's hard for you to take that person out of the criminal act, you know, and separate it. You can't. They each have value. You know, the criminal act is like, man, should have never did it. But then there's that person that you saw, that you try to train and you want to have an impact on, because maybe that's how you define your existence. Maybe this person was going to become that one that you were going to have that impact on before you retire. You don't know. You don't know, because sometimes when you have value to someone else, maybe that value isn't just valuable to that person. Maybe it's also valuable to you because you've invested that time. And maybe this is that story that you're going to tell when you start questioning about the things that you could have done in your life. And this is that one story that brings value to you. And now all of a sudden, the ending is messed up. It's just not where you want it to be. You know, I dealt with a problematic employee that I thought I could cultivate. I thought that I could mentor. Person was problematic, but I didn't know that. They kind of got into little things, and I would always do what I can to give them advice, to, you know, give them a path to go on, and, you know, just try to get them to do what needs to be done. And there was an investment of time. I'm not talking about 2-minute dialogues. I'm talking about 35, 40 minutes worth of discussions, you know, and the person being receptive to that, and actually you seeing them doing what's supposed to be done. You give them an expectation, you see them taking that expectation, it motivates you to get involved even more. And then what happens is this person made a very bad choice. And now the conflict for me was, I saw this individual as, yes, a piece of shit for what they did, but I couldn't separate the fact that they also were someone I invested my time in, someone I had faith in, and maybe at the end of the day could have been part of a successful story that I would tell my people when I started questioning my worth in life and where was my impact. However, we all want to have an impact. It's on a grand scale or on a personal scale. And eventually, I had to be the one to serve this person their charges, which means I had to go to the jail and serve this individual. Now, the story is not specific about this individual. It's really specific about me and how I felt about what I had to do. Because believe it or not, a lot of people think that this is easy, but it wasn't for me because I had conflict. Because, again, I know what they did was wrong. I know they deserve the consequence. I'm not trying to minimize that. But then there's that person I saw so much potential in. And basically all the time that I had invested is now fruitless, and just this is going to be it. This is that definitive moment where once I give those charges, everything I've done, the investment in this individual, the story that I was later told, it's done, comes to an end. So I give the person the charges, and there's the custody side of me that's like, screw this individual. That's it, done, end of story. This person did something wrong, walk away. As I start to move further out, this person looked at what I gave them and then looked up and said, I don't know what to do. I need help. And for a second in my mind, I froze, and I'm thinking like, you messed up, possibly posed a threat to the facility, to people that I work with. So I had this mentality like, you know what? Screw that. But then there's who I am coming into this profession that started to speak and say, Gange, if you walk away from this individual, you're going to regret that. Because as much as you hate what she's done, as much as you despise what she's done, you're not that person that just turns away from people. You're not that person that just walks away from people in need. And that, be honest with you, that was a hell of a conflict. And I wind up turning around and telling that individual, some slight directions about, this is what you have to do. You definitely got to get a lawyer. Totally professional. Again, the professional compassion that we talked about, whether she deserved it or not. But the funny thing is, guys, when I got to the car, after I had that little chat, I realized something. I didn't do that for her. I didn't turn around for her to help her. Did it for myself to remind me of who I am, of who I used to be, and to convince myself I'm still that individual. So in the end, that was me after 18 years saying, hey, I haven't changed. Even when all the pressure tells me I need to do this and do that, I hadn't changed. And I'm going to tell you something, guys. When I start questioning who I was, my worth, that's one of the instances that I'll remember that challenged me, that pushed me to, okay, Tony, this is where you're going to totally be 100% of that profession, or you're going to remind us there's still some of you in this profession. And I think, and again, this is between us because, again, remember, this is someone I was invested in. So this goes out to the training officers that may have trained somebody that felt conflict when that person did something foolish. There was a human side of me that if I didn't turn around, I would have probably regretted that for the rest of my life. So again, the need to react, the need to say something wasn't for her. It was for me, just to remind me I am who I was, and I'll always be who I was. Hey, Connie, you had a similar story too that you mentioned on the prior recording that unfortunately we lost. Can you say that story before we go into closing?
Sure. So, I had this nurse who was an amazing nurse. When she was on the shift, I never had to think twice about what was happening in the unit. That's just who she was. She could do so many things. She was thorough. She was trustworthy. She was everything. And one night she's on shift. I won't go into the details of what happened, but, she assumed that someone else was going to be taking care of an inmate that came in and was on the medical unit. And, no code was called. There were a lot of things that went wrong during that particular incident. And, ultimately, I think the inmate passed away. But when we went reviewing the security cameras and such and going through the investigative process, essentially they were determined that this nurse or the nurses on the shift in that unit that night were going to be terminated. And I mean, the internal struggle was that I know this was not something malicious that this nurse did. This nurse, like, she was someone that I admired, you know, and, you know, we had little conversations here and there, and, you know, she was thinking about what she was going to be doing next in her career because she was getting closer to retirement. And, like, you know, when we went through the whole union process and arbitration, and, you know, here it is, I'm in this position where I need to talk as the manager. I have to represent the organization. I can't necessarily talk as someone who's giving her credibility, someone who's bolstering her reputation. And, like, in everything in me, you know, outside of this arbitration, like, I'm already talking to the director of nursing. I'm like, this woman is a great nurse. Like, we can't let this happen, you know? But the agency position was the agency position, and there really wasn't nothing much that I could do outside of what I'd already expressed prior going into arbitration. And, you know, everything inside of me was bothered by the fact that this woman was going to lose her job. And I think I was even more torn because there were discussions about taking away her license. And in my mind, it's like someone with that level of clinical talent, like, I don't even think it was just skill. Like, she was a great nurse. And as much as I kind of just tried to advocate on her behalf, like, of course, it was like a losing battle because someone had to pay since a life was lost. And I think those were one of those decisions where, like, you as me as the administrator, like, I didn't sleep well with what was happening with her. And, you know, after the arbitration, we ended up kind of seeing each other in the restroom. And, you know, it's kind of like, I want to hug her, but I know that that's not what I can do. And the most that I could say, because she's like, well, you know, what am I supposed to do now? And, you know, the most I could do is give her at least a little bit of direction as to what her next steps could be without necessarily, you know, I guess, compromising myself. And I feel that's one of the things that as we transition in these roles, you know, knowing who you are, you get these situations that will challenge you, and they will challenge who you are. But I feel like when you can default to your natural self, to your morals, your values, and you see to your core that you're still the same person, like, I feel like those are the moments where you get confirmation that although this environment has forced me to be tough, maybe forced me to be more or less accepting of things, you know, I was never very boisterous, right? And now here it is, years after being in corrections, like, I'm speaking up, I got a voice, I got something to say. And I was never that person. I was usually pretty shy, and I'd fall to the back and that kind of person. So, you know, the changes may not always be so great, right? And so if you don't know who you are, the change can go either way. And, you know, I can appreciate when I have those experiences that reminds me that everything that makes you Connie is still there.
Right, and the reason why you appreciate, like what you just said, it's not about change, it's about growth and development. I mean, you know, we get tested all the time, and the only way we can really pass that test is if we find a way, I'm telling you, is to keep a sense of self. You know, that's what's going to ultimately keep you balanced, because, again, that sense of self keeps you consistent with who you are, who you need to be. And then it's also with that consistency comes the fact that I can rely on myself. I trust myself. Like you said, you know, you could always go back to that default. The reason why is because you trust that default. You know, so even when you make a decision as management, you know, when you get to a spot where it's just not in policy, you know, trust in yourself. Be consistent, you know, and I'm telling you something, that consistency brings confidence 100% of the time. And again, if you don't know yourself coming in, or if you don't know yourself as you start to move up, you're going to be lost when you wind up having to rely on yourself and you're totally a stranger to yourself. Hey, Connie, any closing thoughts?
I would just like to say, you know, like, just do your best to stay true to yourself. You know, I mean, yes, there will be requirements of you and your personality that may change because the environment does have some impact on you. There will be some integration of your new learning. That's growth. That's what happens, but, just don't get lost. Sometimes people over-identify with the titles and they lose who they are. And I just would caution anyone who's over-identifying with their title and they're forgetting who they are to the core.
Hey, well said, man. That final thought, definitely, don't get lost in the title. The title is not you. You bring what you want to that title. And in the end, the key is, like Connie said, stay true to yourself, stay true to the mission, find the balance, that word professional compassion, and you'll survive in this profession. As always, guys, the show is Tear Talk. If you haven't, please subscribe, interact, engage, comment, hit that bell. The bell's going to notify you every time I post a video. Don't forget, Tear Talk Podcast. Connie has a few podcasts out there. Quickly, Connie, say podcast. Kids are coming home. What are your podcasts? Quick.
Fly Behind the Wall and Conversations with Connie.
Okay, guys, that was quick enough. Everybody stay safe because the kids are home.